Sea of Galilee, where our lectionary passage takes place, is mentioned 10 times in the New Testament. It's not always called the Sea of Galilee. Sometimes it's called the Sea of Tiberias. One time it's called the Lake of Gennesaret. But it's the same body of water. It's relatively small, about 10 miles long, about 7 miles wide at the widest point. The surface is 680 feet below sea level. The depth of the lake is between 130 and 148 feet. So the bottom of the Sea of Galilee is close to 800 feet. It is 800 feet plus below sea level. On the east and west, the northern shore, closer to Capernaum, where Jesus lived with the disciples, and apparently where they're crossing up there, it would not have been 7 miles wide, but there are mountains on the northern shore, and there's ravines that come down from both sides, east and the west, and channel the winds off Mount Hermon, and sometimes then and now, today. Leighton and I have been there. That lake can be whipped up into a froth, just like that. You're familiar with the term Golan Heights. Israel and Jordan, the Arabs have had some difficulties in the Golan Heights. Well, that's where the winds come down from, on the eastern side. And they whip up the lake, and that's what happened in this situation. Our text is in actuality an exorcism story. It was thought that demons lived in rough water. It was thought that demons lived in all water, but sometimes they were more demonic than others, and that was during the storm times. And Jesus' rebuke is a typical exorcism formula in the New Testament. This is just one example of it. The demon is rebuked. The demon of the wind and the storm is rebuked. And they leave. How useful is that for us today? Here at Cottondale, we don't have a lake right here. You got Lake Tuscaloosa up there. You got some other lakes. The Sea of Galilee is relatively small by comparison to many of the power company lakes. I know in Georgia, where we lived in Milledgeville, lake right outside of town was Georgia Power, and it just went on and on. And so many of ours do, but we don't have direct contact with a body of water right here in Cottondale. So it might be the scene is kind of removed from us, but it's very symbolic for the listeners in the first century, or for the readers in the first century, for the people in the first century. Because the symbolism for Christians is that Jesus is moving from the Jewish folks to the Gentiles. Going from west to east. Because Palestine, the Jews were over here, but on the east side of the Sea of Galilee was the Decapolis, 10 Greek cities. And the New Testament calls everybody Greeks who's not Jewish. But they're not all Greeks, they're all different kinds of folk, but they're Gentiles. They're not Jews. And of course, the gospel message is God's power and presence moving out of just Judaism into the whole world. And there's a symbolism here that Jesus is moving from Judaism to the Gentiles. with his disciples, of which we call ourselves members. So the message in this scripture passage probably is as much for me and for you as it was for the disciples at the time. This is a little unusual in that this is the only passage in all the Gospels. If the commentaries are to be believed, I always take them with a grain of salt. You're welcome to look at all the Gospels for yourselves. But this is the only passage in all the Gospels where Jesus' message, Jesus' ministry, is only for the 12. This is the only passage. Now think about that. So we got 4 Gospels, lots of chapters, lots of verses, lots of words. This is the only one where Jesus' ministry and experience and teachings based on this scripture passage is limited to his disciples. That makes it very personal for us. This is a ministry, this is a message to the church. And I think the major part of the message today, you may have different opinions, you're certainly entitled to them, but since I'm up here, I'll go ahead with mine. Major part of the message for me is dealing with fear. Dealing with fear. What was interesting about that scripture passage is that they were afraid of the storm. Jesus stilled the storm. Hey, everything's fine. But scripture tells us they were terrified. Not of the storm, of God's power and presence in their midst. How about if I could make it rain or make it stop raining? Would you think I was the cat's meow, or would you be terrified? That'd be pretty sure I cannot make it rain or stop raining, in case you had any questions about that. But that would be a terrifying thing. It's not an easy thing or a comfortable thing to be in the presence of the living God. Scripture tells us that all the way through the Hebrew Bible. Matter of fact, nobody's ever been in God's presence and seen God. Moses got to see his backside one time. That was the best that happened. And part of that's because people don't want to be in God's presence. It is very frightening and terrifying. And so the disciples are scared. Now, I'm not scared about being in God's power and presence. I'm a little dumber than the disciples. But fear is something we all have to deal with. I think of 3 major fears. I have some experience with fear. Personally, in Milledgeville, Steve didn't come home from school. Our oldest child. He got off, he was supposed to get off school bus up at the head of the hill there, walked down past the Walker Building and the Green Building, two of my buildings, in which to minister to our house, which was right next to the chapel. And he'd usually get there about 3:15. And one day he didn't come home. And so I thought, maybe he's walking slow, he's visiting with some folks. He wasn't there by 3:30. So I got worried. And I got in my car and I drove in reverse the route of the school bus back to the grammar school over there where he was. And went inside, looked in his room, talked to his teacher and the principal. No, school bus left. He was on it. So now I'm really getting worried. And I drive back along that route and I get home. It's about 10 before, I guess, by that time, maybe close to 4 o'clock. And I'm picking up the phone to call the highway patrol and report a missing person, and I hear the front door, or the back door, close. And I'm playing down the phone, running the hall. Steve! Dad? Where have you? You know what, I'm ready to dance on his head, but I just busted into tears. Because it's easier for me to be angry than scared. And I was substituting anger for fear in that situation. But that was a big fear in my life. When Lane had breast cancer in 1998, I feared that I would just follow her into death. I was scared. She whipped it, which gave us too much confidence later on with pancreatic cancer. So I had been afraid, and I don't like that feeling. I do not commend that feeling for anybody. There are three major fears in life, I think. We all have our individual fears, as I just described, some of mine. But some of the major issues in life, one is fear of loss. Grief. I have some empathy for that situation, less now than 19 months ago, but still, fear of loss. We lose loved ones. That's very difficult. Probably the most difficult experience human beings, emotional experience, human beings ever have to deal with is grief. The loss of a loved one, a loved object, a loved part of ourselves. That's hard. Grief with divorce, I think, is harder in many ways than grief with death because it's more difficult to get closure on the situation. Have to maintain contact. Sharon my daughter maintains contact with her ex through contact with the children. Those things continue, and so it's difficult to get closure on the grief of the divorce situation. Funeral Blues by W.H. Auden, I think, speaks to grief with divorce. He was my north, my south, my east, my west, my working week, and my Sunday best. My noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought love would last forever. I was wrong. That's a sad, sad commentary. Loss. Fear of loss. Very frightening. Then there's the fear of failure. As a rigid perfectionistic personality, I can tell you that I have not failed many times in my life. And I can give you a recipe for avoiding failure. Don't try anything new. Just stick with what you know and practice it over and over and over, and you get real good at it. The kids and mine, when they were younger, and they would catch me in a mistake. This is pretty rare. But when they would catch me in a mistake, they would all stand around in a circle and point at me. They wouldn't say anything. They'd just point at me. We all got a big kick out of that. Fear of failure has probably held me back oftentimes in my life in terms of new experiences. It's easy to stay with what we know. Now, this can actually occur with people in relation to religious possibilities. That's not an issue here in our congregation that I know about. We have good volunteers in the educational program, in the missions program, in the charities program. We do lots of good things in the community and around the world like that. But some people say, oh, I couldn't do it. Oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not qualified. I'm not capable of teaching Sunday school class. It's too much responsibility for me. I couldn't live up to it. I couldn't be a deacon. I couldn't be an elder. And God forbid that God should call me to preach. Oh, no. That couldn't be a possibility. Because I'm just here to clean out the cesspool or whatever I'm here for. Don't amount to much. Let me give you some biblical examples of people God was able to use. Noah was alcoholic. Abraham was ancient and a pimp to boot. Jacob was a liar. Leah was ugly. Joseph was grandiose and a selfish little twit. Moses had a stuttering problem. Gideon was a fearful man. Samson had long hair and was a womanizer. Rahab was a prostitute. David not only had an affair, but also was accessory to murder. Man after God's own heart, Scripture tells us. Elijah was suicidal. Isaiah preached naked in Jerusalem. That's not been in the Gospel Lectionary passages, but it's in the Hebrew Bible. Jonah ran from God. Naomi was a widow. Job went bankrupt. Peter denied Christ 3 times. The disciples fell asleep while they were praying. I have some empathy for that situation. It happened to me one time at Howard College in a prayer meeting. Martha worried about everything. Mary Magdalene was demon-possessed. The Samaritan woman was a divorcee several times and was currently in an illicit relationship when she met Jesus. Zacchaeus was one of these persons who's not overweight or just under tall. He was a small individual. Paul was hyper-religious. Timothy had an ulcer. And Lazarus was dead. Now all these people in Holy Scripture have given evidence of being good, useful servants of God. So the good news is I have wasted my life trying to be perfect. Could have had a lot more fun doing other things, I imagine, along the way. Because God makes the difference. That's very important. Fear of failure is common for human beings. And then there's the worst for me, fear of the unknown. I'm still, at the age of 77, a little bit afraid of the dark in a strange place. Not so much where I live now, but in a strange place, I still get spooky when the house creaks and talks, creaks and groans, that sort of thing. The disciples were afraid of Jesus. I don't think they were afraid he physically hurt them, but who he was, God's power and presence revealed in him, was still something they did not understand. Jesus, in spite of his time with them, and we're moving in Mark's gospel, they've seen him work, they've heard him teach, they've watched him be with people. They've bought into what he's saying. They've bought into what he's doing, this new concept of God being someone who focuses on people rather than on the Torah. They agree with that. They like that. But they still don't know him and who he is to the extent of the reality of God's presence in the incarnation. Their ignorance is so profound that it will eventually become destructive, and they abandon him at the cross. Fear of the unknown is a terrible thing. Not knowing. Again, for a rigid perfectionistic personality who depends on knowledge of situations to do it right, the unknown is very frightening. Coming to know Jesus, God's power and presence in the reality, as the disciples did, was terrifying. This sermon title, Wrong Kind of Faith, comes out of my experience at Fort Stewart, Georgia, a long time ago. I kind of hate remembering how long time ago that was. But it was a Mutifor, multiple unit training assembly, 4 sessions over a weekend, 2 days at Fort Stewart. I was with the 49th Infantry Division from Macon. And we'd gone down to Fort Stewart for the weekend, Georgia National Guard. And on Sunday morning, somebody else was riding with me. And And so we'd finished the war games and everything. And I was sitting around the barracks waiting for the person to come who was not ready to go at the time. And the TV's, black and white TV, never mentioned this was a long time ago, was on up there. And then give me one channel, and here's Oral Roberts. You're familiar with Oral? You know, put your hand on the radio and you'll be healed and that sort of thing. Well, I was pretty contemptuous of that sort of popular religion, but I didn't have anything else to do. And so I was sitting there listening to Oral, and he made a point about being afraid. He said, fear is having faith in the wrong things. Now think about that. When I'm afraid of something, I'm afraid of something that might happen, or something that could happen, or something that I imagine would happen. But I believe that will happen. I have faith. Something bad's going to happen. And we mentioned glass half empty. That's pretty much the way I've lived my life, psyching myself down so I wouldn't have so far to fall when it didn't work out. Of course, I married somebody whose glass was always half full, and that was God's blessing for me. I might have gotten to a glass that's only a quarter empty now, so I'm moving in a better direction. But my life, in many ways, has been founded on the faith in the wrong things. Afraid something bad's going to happen. Afraid I won't be able to. Afraid I'm going to fail at this. And so I have handicapped myself, perhaps. From time to time, you have handicapped yourself that way. Instead of trusting God in the storm, I have trusted myself and been fearful of the result. But I have believed at a deep level that I was going to screw up. Fear, Oral said, is having faith, believing in the wrong things. It made a lot of sense to me. Still does. Charles Finley, 1905. Charles Finley was an African-American musician. He knew about storms and fears in his personal life. He knew about storms and fears in life and history of the African Americans post-slavery in the United States. He wrote about storms. When the storms of life are raging, stand by me. Stand by me. When the storms of life are raging, stand by me. When the world is tossing me like a ship upon the sea, you who rules the wind and water, stand by me. In the midst of tribulation, stand by me. Stand by me. In the midst of tribulation, stand by me. When the hosts of hell assail and my heart begins to fail, you who never lost a battle, stand by me. If fear is having faith in the wrong thing, then strength, courage, hope in fearful times is the result of moving that faith from the wrong things to the right things. It's our choice to get on the boat. Who hath ears to hear, let them hear.